said, what in the world were they thinking of? I mean, they're just that little island, we'll clean them up in 2 months. And that didn't happen. It went on for a few years. You either got drafted or you joined some kind of an organization. And I chose to be a naval aviator. I enlisted in 42. They could not take us right away. They had such a backlog of guys wanting to be Navy pilots. 7 days after Pearl Harbor, they realized they were going to have to get men and material out to these islands, and it was too slow by ship. So they organized the Naval Air Transport Squadron, and we transported men and materials, and then coming back, things had to come back sometimes. Men had to come back. Wounded had to come back. I went in right away to the old designation was DC-4. It was the R-5D for the Navy. And that was the plane I flew all over the Pacific. The lives we would have lost if we would have invaded Japan, like when I was a high schooler and thought we'd wipe them out in a couple of weeks, they were fierce fighters. One flight I had from Guam to Kwajalein with these litter cases, and these guys were so badly shot up. The volcanic ash was still all over their face and hands. They didn't even clean them up. They just got them on a plane and let's go. It was a part of the necessary part of the war. And I just felt like I'm contributing now. Gave me a great privilege to represent my country.
Ladies and gentlemen, Bob South.
I was born in July 21st, 1925 in Norwich, England, and we used to listen to the news on the wireless or radio. It would either be Chamberlain,
It was a fearful thing.
or later on it was Winston Churchill.
We shall fight on the landing grounds. We shall fight in the fields.
And we used to listen to Hitler, and I remember him being on there yelling and screaming. When I was 14, the first German bombers came over to Norwich, and I had just left my sister's house, and I had to ride my bicycle past the barracks, and all of a sudden it came down, and I heard some, oh my goodness, they're shooting at me. So I got off my bicycle and I ran in the woods. You can join the army when you're 19, but you have to have your parents' permission at 17 and a half. I joined that in February 1942. I went into the Signal Corps. Then they had an opening in a heavy artillery battery, and I had to tell them, what kind of planes they were. I also did Morse code, and I felt so important, and I had to join the army or do something for my king and country.
Ladies and gentlemen, Salve Keithley-McCulley.
I grew up during the Depression. You had to make do with what you got. Sometimes you didn't get very much. March 3rd, 1943, I enlisted, went to the Great Lakes for basic, went from Great Lakes to Boston to pick up my ship, the USS Macomb, and we was going into Italy, and we spotted this submarine, picked it up on sonar. We chased it using K guns all along, we set depth charges that shoot off the side like that. We brought that submarine up, the guy come up on the top there of the focus with a white flag. And you know, if that had been the opposite, if that had been the Germans, they'd just blown us away. And we left January 45 from Charleston, South Carolina, the destroyer minesweeper, DMS-23. And the orders were to go to Okinawa, and we fighting suicide planes, enemy planes, the kamikazes were, and that's when the plane hit it. And the whole crew was eliminated, killed them all. I'm proud of watching the Japanese surrender. That is a highlight of my career, but I'm also proud of capturing the German submarine also. Anybody aboard ship gets credit for whatever happens. You're one little cog in the big wheel of war.
Ladies and gentlemen, Ray Shockley.
In 1944, in April, I was drafted and sent to Fort Hood, Texas. And at the end of the training, several fellows said, "We're going to go over to Fort Benning and get in the paratroopers." And said, "They got fancy uniforms and the girls like them." So it sounded good to me. They transported me into Camp Mormon, where the 101st was resting right after the Battle of the Bulge. I was put in the 506 Parachute Infantry Regiment with the Band Brothers. So they took me in a huge tent full of uniforms and told me these people were all dead. If you could find one you liked, you could have it. It had a fellow's name, Aranda, in the back of it. So then the next day, they gave me a machine gun. Told me that I was a new guy, and I was going to get the machine gun. If there's no one else wanted to do that, the automatic weapons were the first ones at the German shop. The following morning, they called me down to headquarters and said, "We're going to put you in the band." They said, "We need a tenor sax player in the regimental band." I went into Hitler's office in the Reichshassnick,
had been thousands of people there before me, and there was nothing there left to liberate. So I went out in the hall, and it looked like a home chest. I raised the lid, and it was half full of Hitler's stationery, which I promptly liberated and sent home. We got in the victory parade down 5th Avenue, and the 82nd Airborne, which I was put into then, led the parade for 5 hours. We went down 5th Avenue.
Their first salute they throw to their comrades who must stand on the curb, whose red blood and purple heart...
Sort of about 1 week. I was there 2 years total. 1 year overseas and 1 year in the United States. And I was discharged in early 1946.
Ladies and gentlemen, Charles Staubus. We can all agree this is a great Thursday night, yes? Yeah. All right, it's so good to be with all of you tonight. We're going to get right into the questioning. So, Bill, you've got a mic. Bob, you've got a mic there next to you. So let me have you grab that. And there's a little switch on the mic. We'll just flip it straight up. A little lever there. Sally, you've got a mic like mine. Can you say something in that, Sally? And let's make sure it's working. Can you just say hello on the mic? Let's see. Okay, I think maybe it's not on. Let's take a quick look here. All right. Okay, there we go. And Bob, you guys are up right there. So Bill, without further ado, let's get right into it.
Is this better?
That is great. You are you are live and in color. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to ask specific questions of each one of you. So I will call on each one of you. We're going to start with Bill down there on the end. And Bill, my first question for you is, you mentioned in the video that they cannot prepare you for combat. It just can't be done. Would you tell us what it was like, the difference between your training and when you got into combat?
Probably the best explanation I can give you is that the difference between a movie that's a love story and falling in love with yourself. That's the difference between combat and non-combat. If you've ever seen a movie about a couple falling in love, and if you have fallen in love yourself, you know there's one whale of a difference, and that's how I describe it. I could try some other ones, but I'm afraid this one didn't go over that well.
You found a distinct difference between training in the States and when somebody was trying to kill you.
Yeah. Just that. That is self-explanatory. Unless you've never been frightened, of course, if a person without fear, I suppose, wouldn't be that much difference. But for anybody who is normally given to being frightened out of their skin when somebody shoots at them, or keeps shooting at them, and shooting at them, and shooting at them, try 24 hours of artillery fire sometime, you'll then understand the difference. Otherwise you won't. So I'm sorry about that one. That's a tough one.
Yeah, thank you, Bill. I appreciate that. Sally, This next question is for you. How old were you when you enlisted in the military?
I was 16.
And what was it like to get into the military at such a young age? Were you the only one? Were there others that young?
I'm sorry, I don't quite understand.
Sure. So what was it like to get into the military that young? Were you the only one that was that young, or were there others?
I'm sure there were others, but I didn't know anyone. They were all much older than me.
And you talked your parents into letting you join, is that correct?
Right.
And they were not on board with that when you started?
Pardon?
They were not on board with you signing up when you began? They were not in favor of you joining the military?
My mother kept saying, you're too young, you're too young. But my father, who was in World War I, he said, let her go. So my father was on my side.
Good to have somebody on your side. Thank you, Sally. Bob, the next question is for you. As far as we know, there was no GPS or computers in World War II. And yet what we know from your story is that you flew all over the vast Pacific, navigating by what? How in the world did you guys do it and come back alive?
Well, we had good navigators. Got the wrong foot. Got a lot of echo up here. Anyhow, we had good navigators, but on occasion, like at night flights, of course they would shoot stars and keep up with us and plot the position continually. But if it was overcast, they couldn't shoot the stars. And so our navigation was, the only navigation we had was the predicted winds when we'd leave one airport and try to find an island on the next. And if those winds held, the navigator could pretty well put us on the spot. But if those winds shifted, we had no real knowledge of where we're going to hit that island or not. I know a lot of you probably familiar with Amelia Earhart. And when she was trying to find that island, she had nothing to go by. She had an excellent navigator, but he couldn't shoot the stars. And so it was very hard to find some of those islands out there. But luckily, winds held pretty good on most all of the departure positions that we had, and those winds held and allow us to pretty well hit those islands out there. Thank goodness. But that was our particular navigation. Daytime, we couldn't shoot the stars. Our navigator could take a shot on the sun and get a sun line, and that would help determine our speed maybe a little, but it was very difficult. Venus was actually available in the daytime, and a good navigator could find Venus and shoot Venus. So we'd get two lines on our map. And that's about the way navigation was done in those days. And we were all pretty lucky. We usually all found that island we were looking for.
That makes sense, Bob. And I believe you told me once that it was so specific over this ocean, especially at night, if you missed your turn, if the plane didn't turn when it was supposed to, that was it. Because there'd be no finding your way back, no having enough fuel. So maybe the next time our cell phones die, we're okay? Yeah, we're all okay here. Yeah, we think we can make it. Thank you, Bob. Charles, my next question goes to you. Would you tell us how you felt when they took away your machine gun and gave you a saxophone? So I was asking how you felt when they took away your machine gun and gave you a saxophone.
That was a happy day. I've never had a machine gun before, and I found out how heavy they are with the tripod that goes with them, and we went out on a little maneuver one day, with first day, and so the next morning they called me down to headquarters, said, "We need you in the band. So we need a tenor sax player." They took the machine gun away from me, and I was glad to see it go. The reason they gave it to me in the first place was right after the Battle of Balls, and all the machine gunners had been killed. That's the first thing the Germans did was kill automatic weapons. And nobody else there wanted to do that. And so I was a new guy, and I got it. So that's how I happened to have that. And I was in the same regiment with the Band of Brothers. You may have heard of them. And when I first went over there, the 506th Regiment of the 101st Airborne Division. So I stayed in the band from then on, and I got in the 82nd Airborne Division for the Big Victory Parade in New York.
Okay, and that's a question I have coming, so we'll save a little something. I want you to talk about that. Thank you, Charles. So Ray, as far as I know on this platform, you're the only veteran here that served in both theaters of war, Europe and in the Pacific. Were you more frightened in one, in Europe versus the Pacific, or vice versa? What was that like fighting in both places?
We started out in the Atlantic, chasing subs, went into the Mediterranean, going into Italy, picked up a sub on the sonar, chased the sub for 3 days, finally brought it up at Straits of Gibraltar, and then sub surfaced, and here come a guy with a white flag. Give up, So what do? I would have shot him personally. Being Americans, we're easy. We call a big ship to take the extra prisoners off because we couldn't handle them. And then they got them off, then we sank it.
Which you said?
Number 616.
U-boat 616, which in his full documentary, we actually have pictures of the captain of that U-boat when it was sunk. And so that's when you were on the USS Macomb as a destroyer. And I'm going to come back to you in just a minute about what happened to that ship. So I'm going to come back to you in just a second. Bill, I'd like to come back over to you if I can. And my question for you is regarding the concentration camps. I remember you had some specific thoughts, and it's very potent that you talked about smelling them versus seeing them. But you had some specific thoughts about what if we had known what was going on, and maybe some did, and how that might have affected the prosecution of the war. Would you share that with us?
Yeah, there's a couple of things. We, being the enlisted men and the fighting units, didn't know anything about the fact that the Germans were murdering en masse the Jews of Europe. Had no idea that was going on. History later shows that not only did our State Department know all about it, but so did the administration of the government. I can't help but imagine that the guys I knew, at least, had they known fought with greater enthusiasm than they did. Apparently it was sufficient enthusiasm to win the war, but nevertheless, it was something you had to do when you did it. But there was no satisfaction in it. But had we known that we would be saving lives while we were doing what we were doing, I think we would have done more quickly, and had we done so, we would have saved probably tens of thousands of lives that the Germans wouldn't have had a chance to kill, because most of the murdering went on in the last couple of months of the war. The last January, February, March of 1945 is when the German murder machine was at its peak. And then the last couple of weeks, it started to slow down because the guards knew we'd be in terrible trouble if we got there, and we were getting there. They deserted the camps, and the camps for the most part were available to liberate. When you got there was no resistance. Does that answer the question?
Yes. Yes, it is. You were the first one I ever had say, had we known what was going on, perhaps we would have moved quicker.
I think so.
Yeah. Thank you, Bill. Sally, my question is for you. And the question is, in your video, you talked about feeling so important. And would you tell us a little bit more about your role in the Royal Signal Corps? You know, what you did and what made you feel so important?
Well, I really can't. Can you hear me?
Yep.
I really can't tell you what I did in Signal Corps because it was very hush-hush.
And still hush-hush today?
And it's still that way today.
I'm going to take a show of hands. Who wants to find out? Everybody can you give us one little secret of what you did? Has anyone, I know you Navy boys have heard it, has anyone ever heard the phrase, loose lips sink ships?
Yeah.
World War II? Sally Keithley-McCulley. Those will be the tightest lips you find tonight. Very nice, Sally. Well, we are glad that you did serve. And my next question, Bob, I want to come back to you, if I can. How difficult was it? You talked about going and getting these men off of the island campaigns. How difficult was it to do that? How difficult was it to see these men in the condition they were in? Obviously, you knew you were doing something important, but can you talk to us about that?
Well, it was very difficult. When we pick them up sometimes, I can never forget one trip. We picked them up in Guam, and they were off of Iwo Jima. I hadn't really figured out how they got them from Iwo Jima to Guam. And they were still covered with volcanic ash. I don't know whether you've seen some of the old pictures of that, but those guys dug into that volcanic ash as deep as they could to keep from getting hit from machine gun fire and everything. And some of them got awfully shot up. And these were litter cases, and some of the mildly wounded got still ambulatory. They could get other flights back. But these that were litter cases, we stacked them 4 high in our aircraft, and we had 9 bays of them. And they were all still covered with volcanic ash. And I thought, why can't we wash them up a little? And whenever we had litter cases, we had to have a nurse with us. So we had a Navy nurse, and she said, we ain't got time to clean them up. We got to get them to Honolulu to a good hospital. And said, basically all we're trying to do is keep them comfortable. And basically that nurse was really, I guess basically kept them on morphine every time they get the horrible pain and everything. But I'll never forget the sight of loading, just loading them. And on the plane there, they were really shot up.
For all of us here who have never been in combat, we take your word for it, what it's like to see men in that condition. Thank you, Bob. Charles, my next question is for you. We saw on your video that you liberated some of Hitler's stationery. Thank you for, you liberated some of Hitler's stationery.
Oh, yeah.
And so, naturally, what else would you do? And so, Charles, here's my question to you. How satisfying was it to write home on Hitler's stationery?
Well, my dad was assistant postmaster in Brunswick, Missouri, so I never wrote to my mother, and always wrote to him, because he saw everything first when it came in there. So I thought it was a pretty good deal to be able to do that and write to him like that. And so I still have a lot of the copies there that I show people, and show and tell, I call them. And of course, we only had 2 sheets of that I used regular stationery. And one of them I used to write home on it. The other, I made copies, and I wrote to the IRS on it. My son's a big lawyer in Dallas, and he didn't think much of that.
Well, chances are also good that nobody here has a better show and tell story from your life, right? So, did anybody notice, it kind of went quickly, but did you notice the date on the 8.5 by 11 stationery with Hitler's stamp on it? Did anybody notice? The date was May 8th, 1945. Does that ring a bell? That's the day Germany surrendered in World War II. We can't think of anything more poetic than to write your dad a letter on Hitler's stationery on the day that Germany surrendered. So well done. We were just saying that was so poetic that you wrote your dad on the day Germany surrendered.
Well, it was a really lucky thing that I got that stationery. I went into his office. There had been thousands of people through there before me. There wasn't a thing left to liberate. I went out in the hall, and it looked like a home. I lifted the lid, and it was half full of his stationery. Nobody else had seen that, so I just couldn't believe it. And so I promptly mailed the whole thing home to Dad.
It pays to have a father who's in the postmaster service, right?
Yeah.
Yeah. Thank you, Charles. Ray, many people may not know about World War II, that the Battle of Okinawa was the bloodiest battle in the Pacific. And that's saying something, because you have battles like Iwo Jima, Tinian, Saipan, and next year, 2025, will be the 80th anniversary of the Battle of Okinawa, fought in 1945. And Ray, one of the famous stories from World War II is the Japanese use of the kamikaze planes. It's my understanding that the USS Macomb, which was a destroyer in Europe, and then converted to a minesweeper for the Pacific, so your job was to sweep out mines. It's my understanding that your ship shot down 8 kamikaze planes. Is that correct?
Yeah.
Can you tell us about that? What that was like to battle that kind of an enemy?
Well, anybody knows that when you're in an attack, what it's like, you know, you just boom, 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 and being on the radar, you lose contract when they get in there too close, but you're picking up the next wave of them. You're getting ready to pick them up. And we shot down those about, we'd like to say 8 or 9, and the one that got through hit our gun mount and wiped it out. And I wiped all 6 guys.
Yeah. And we talked about that because that's a significant story in your service time. That one of the gentlemen that was killed when that kamikaze broke through and hit the Macomb, his name was Jim. And Jim was a friend of Ray's. And Jim and Ray were scheduled to switch from the radar room to the gun mount. So Ray was supposed to have been at the gun mount at that time. I don't remember why you were late getting to the gun mount. Was there a reason you were delayed in coming out of the radar room?
Well, we were going to switch, but by the time we were going to switch, I got into radar, so we didn't get to switch at the time. And so he took, I would have been there in his place.
And if you watch Ray's full documentary, Ray, you wrote a letter home to Jim's parents, which actually made it home before the notification that comes from the government, the famous postage mailings that came talking about your son. And that mailing sent to his parents just said Jim was missing in action.
I wrote home and told them exactly what happened, and I know they appreciate it because I got letters back like you saw, and it really helped them.
Yeah, and if you watch Ray's feature, you'll see a picture of his friend, Jim, there on the ship. Thank you for telling us about that, Ray. Bill, if I could come back to you, down at the end of the line there. It's been a request that you tell us the story of the violin. And so would you tell the audience about that story and what happened? Where were you? What was the occasion?
This was in the latter stages of the war in Europe. We had, I guess, as I recall, we had crossed the Rhine maybe a week or 2 earlier, and our target was Berlin. And we were making great strides. The Germans had essentially broken. They were still fighting, some were not, but mainly they were. But their armies were somewhat scattered. And so sometimes we would take a considerable amount of land in a day. Other times we wouldn't get more than a mile or 2. Anyway, this particular day, we were able to move forward about 20-odd miles. And that's a big jump under the circumstances. But we came to a little town at the end of the afternoon, around 6:30, 7 o'clock. And they told us to stop. We're going to hold up here, put up a position. And we did. And so then most of us were not on the line because there was no fighting as such going on. We gathered in the house to eat our dinner rations. And as it happened, the officers, the 2 lieutenants, both were platoon leaders, had received their ration of liquor. American Army did not allow alcoholic beverages for their troops under any circumstances, but they did allow the officers a very small ration, a couple of bottles, I believe. Anyway, in the next room, and they were having something to drink, and they called in the senior non-coms and gave them a drink. And the rest of us were out in this common area, well, it was the living room of the house. And Bergie, as a kid in the squad, had found a violin or a fiddle, and he was playing it. He played it a little bit, and not very well, but it was something that was totally different. And so it was quiet, and all of a sudden, Tom Murphy was the platoon sergeant, came in from the next room, and Bertie had the violin in his hand, and it was pointed at or whatever, and Murphy reached over and took it out of his hands, and then reached over and took the bow. And I thought he'd probably beat him over the head with it. It's the kind of thing Murphy might do. You never knew what he was going to do. He was a hard man, and it's kind of strange. But he was a good soldier. And he picked it up, and he goes, no, this guy is a hard man. You understand, this guy is, I can tell you some stories about him that aren't very pretty, but anyway, he picked it up the fiddle, and he put it under his chin, and he took the bow, played Humoresque, and as he finished playing Humoresque, I noticed that there was a tear running down his face. Took the fiddle and the bow and handed it back to Bergie and walked out of the room. Absolute silence. Nobody knew what the hell to say or do or think. Now, telling the story, and that is all the story, I realize that it may be of some interest to you to hear it. But the impact of the story was more felt by us than it would be felt by you because of context. This was so totally different from everything we've been doing 24 hours a day for months. And to have Murphy, of all people, play Humoresque on the fiddle, well, I'm telling you about it now because that's the impression it made on me.
It truly is the human moments of war. Thank you, Bill, for sharing that with us. Sally, I have a question for you. You are not the only member of your family who served in World War II. Would you tell us about your brother Ernest?
Well, my brother was in the Royal Air Force. Oh, sorry. My brother Ernest was in the Royal Air Force. And he used to go over to Germany and other places to bomb. And he used to come back and tell me that he didn't like doing it, but it had to be done. And one day he was over there with his crew, and he was shot down in France, and he is buried there in France.
And you had a chance to go and visit.
Yes, I have.
What was that experience like with the French?
Well, the French people were so kind. When we went there, we just thought we were just going to be going there by ourselves. And when we got to the village, there was about 2,000 or 3,000 of the villagers, all at the church, waiting for us. And it was just unbelievable, unbelievable.
Yeah, the story in the broader context is their bomber was shot down, and one survived the crash, and the villagers were hiding that British soldier, but the Germans had threatened so much to start killing everyone in the village that he volunteered and came and gave himself up. But every other member of the crew is buried there, immaculately buried there, well tended by the French. Bill, you've been back to Normandy and places like that, Berlin. You can attest to how the Europeans feel about the World War II veterans and what they did.
The people in Normandy in particular haven't forgotten. When I was back there a year ago, last June, they turned out in huge crowds, immense crowds, in the little town of Saint-Église. That's the town with the, you probably have seen a picture of the paratrooper hanging from the steeple of the church, because that's when he came down, his parachute get caught there. That famous picture. That's Saint-Église. And the town is probably, I don't know this for a fact, but it looks to me like maybe a couple thousand people live there, but more likely 800 and 900. So when we were there were over 25,000 French people turned out and came across to that town to see us and to parade on both sides of the street where we paraded. It's every age group, including people our age, they were there, their sons, their grandsons, their great-grandsons, and children and girls, of course, and cheering and shouting and waving and wanting to shake your hand, and girls kissing you, and they haven't forgotten, and they don't let it go. They remember the boys that came over so far, such a long distance to help them out, because the Germans had been pretty hard on them, and besides the fact that the Germans had occupied, that was the biggest thing, the fact that they were there, not so much what they did, but the fact that they were there. And it was just indescribable, the tears running down the faces of the ladies of our age, and sometimes their daughters and sometimes their granddaughters, and it was, they haven't forgotten. They have not forgotten us.
Thank you, Bill. Two remarkable stories of how the Europeans feel about those who came to help liberate their country. Bob, I'd like to ask you this question. I remember a story you told once that on one of your flights, you had a fighter escort, unrequested. Can you tell us that story, what happened there?
Yeah, we were coming into Guam, and of course Guam was secured at that time. We had kicked Japs off of that island, and Guam was a big island, but it was well secured, and we only could come in after the island was secured. And so we're flying into it, and our IFF, which was an identification frequency, was out, and we knew it. So we radioed ahead to Guam and told them that our IFF was out. And so they're not going to get a good indication that we're friendly coming in. So we wanted them to know it. So it wasn't a few minutes later, I looked out the window, and here's a Navy fighter sitting on my wing. I leaned over, looked out the other window, and there's another Navy fighter sitting on the other wing. So even though we radioed ahead and warned them that we were friendly, but we couldn't identify ourselves, they didn't trust us. They sent up 2 Navy fighters to escort us back into Guam. And so it kind of hit me that the war isn't over. And they're prepared to even an island that they've taken, that things could still happen. And I was very impressed with the Navy at that time.
And you're probably the only one on the stage who ever had a fighter escort in World War II. You must have felt like a big deal.
What? Let's say again?
You must have felt like a big deal, or were you just scared?
Oh no, we thought it was great, a big deal. No, we appreciated it very much.
All right, thank you for sharing that with us, Bob. Charles, would you please tell the audience what it was like to march in the New York City Victory Parade when you came home? Would you tell us what that was like?
Well, I got in the 82nd Airborne Division Band on the way home. So many people had been sent home before me, and that they left. The 101st didn't have hardly anybody left, so they consolidated into the 82nd, and they put me in the band, the 50-piece band, and they had an E-flat clarinet there, which I always wanted to play. I used to play the B-flat, and so I latched onto that, and it was the smallest instrument in the band, which is a good thing, because we marched for 5 hours without stopping down Fifth Avenue, and the bass drummers and the sousaphone guys, I was sure glad I wasn't one of them.
That's a great story, it really is. And kind of in tandem with that, Ray, you had a very, very special moment in your service in the Pacific. Kind of in tandem with Charles marching in the parade, you got to be an eyewitness to the Japanese surrendering in Tokyo Bay. Would you tell us what that was like for you?
Well, I had a friend that was up in the director, which is the top of the ship, the big scope, and then I stood watching with him sometimes, so I got to go up there and watch the Japanese surrender with that big scope, and then we'd take turns. I'd get off, and then he'd get a pair of binoculars and watch it. So we were anchored quite a ways from the Missouri, but it's just as close as you want to get with that big scope.
And did you see General MacArthur there?
Yeah, I saw General MacArthur. And when it first started, I saw two little guys in white uniforms come down and making a table ready to sit at and sign the treaty.
Yeah, those are some remarkable visual memories that we're grateful to hear about, and many of us don't have anything quite that remarkable. We're excited to be with you guys who experience these things. And right now what we'd like to do is we'd like to, and this is really an opportunity, this is a